people are exposed to really, really brutal aggression. You know, the kind of energy and aggression we see right now in Ukraine in a war. But I'm also talking about that same kind of energy of kind of like a sledgehammer, bang, or, you know, when people bulldoze over you and your more sensitive aspects, then sometimes taking hellebore to stand up to the bully wasn't quite enough or not quite the right angle. You know, sometimes it's like when you have a tool like a chisel, it's about like you don't get only get so far at that angle and you have to try a different angle and then a different angle, you know. So I felt that there was really a completely different kind of plant energy, flower energy needed as well to bring about really deeper healing. So this one, it's a little bit blurred, I'm sorry. So this very ordinary thistle that is the emblem of Scotland, for instance. So I got to know this plant when I did live in Scotland and worked with this flower essence. While I was in Scotland, I went on a peace pilgrimage to Sarajevo in the Yugoslavian war, right? So I joined a bunch of women and we rented a bus and went through the front lines of active combat into besieged Sarajevo to give them a message of peace and hope, which was probably the most insane thing I ever did. And, you know, as can happen when you do things like that, very inspired, the moment we arrived in Sarajevo, there was a brief ceasefire. So actually, while we were there, the 2-3 days, there was a ceasefire and fighting only started after we left. So we were able to hold a peace conference and plant a linden tree for peace and cheer people and go again. On that trip, I used various flower essences to treat the environment, you can say, you know, people, because I couldn't be running around and giving everybody essences, although I did have stock bottles with me. And if somebody wanted to listen and learn, I'd explain to them how to use flower essences to heal the shocked people around them. But what was really unbelievable with thistle was that I used it a lot in our own group, and we had in our group some women much older than me from Germany who had lived through the Second World War in Germany and seen active combat and had been bombed, and also a woman from Vietnam who wanted to go, and she was so terrified, she was throwing up, having, you know, all of her trauma being re-triggered. And I was making the whole bus. This is before we even went, you know, before we even went on the bus, I had everybody take thistle, all the women, and they were all, you know, healers and trance mediums and whatever, you know, the kind of insane spiritual women who will have an idea like crossing active combat lines to hold a peace conference in a besieged city. And they were telling me that they couldn't believe how rooted they felt. They were so grounded, you know. They were saying that when they had to walk up to these checkpoints where there was the blue helmets, you know, the United Nations soldiers with their machine guns, you know, that they felt so strong and they're like, you're going to let me pass now, you know. So it was a very, very strong energy. And that whole experience taught me that the thistles as a plant family can help us match that energy of soldiers and of combat. So we didn't go in there scared, you know, or as reluctant women. We marched in there like this little spiritual warrior combat unit, and we did our thing. So I really, really started to appreciate. I think this is also one of the moments that really, really taught me doctrine of signatures and how important the shape of the plant is. Because if you've ever had a garden, you know, the one plant you can't get rid of is thistle in your from your property. And the reason is it has the longest taproot. And if the tiniest bit of it stays at the very bottom, it will rebound, it will regrow from whatever is left at the tip. So this is in terms of doctrine of signatures language that is saying, you can't eradicate me. I have boundless resilience, you know? So you come, you dig me up, you rip off everything, you're as brutal as you want, I'm going to come back, you know? And it's the one plant that will thrive if pasture grounds are overgrazed. Because the cattle, their lips are too soft to chew a thistle. It has really, really strong thorns. And I can't tell you how much I injured myself trying to make a flower essence out of that thing, you know? I mean, as in the flower head got stuck in my finger and I'm like trying to get it out, you know, the thorns out and I'm bleeding. And now I'm like, do I have my blood in the bowl? That wasn't intended. And I mean, it was just unbelievable. So I can only say that I learned a lot from this plant, you know. And I used to always say to the children who were bullied, whom I gave spare thistle essence, I used to say to them, you know, it's the best defended plant, you know, because if you look at the leaves, each leaf looks like a little spear saying like, don't get closer or else I'll spike you. And it does, you know, you get closer, it hurts. So that was the first idea of working with the spiritual warrior essences to face this kind of very, very strong, harsh, aggressive energy. And then on that same trip, the peace convoy to Sarajevo, I also worked with dandelion, which is also in this kit. And I had worked with dandelion before, but I hadn't fully understood, you know. It's like, yeah, and we'll talk about it. It's nice and yellow and it looks like the solar plexus and blah, blah, blah. But that's not really what's so amazing about this plant. What's so amazing about this plant is that then it closes up and it does this thing like whoosh, and then you have these white, I mean, actually the seeds, right? It goes to seed in this white crystal snowflake-like thing. And when you blow on it, then you have these little parachutes fly off. So in the language of plants, it's the ultimate transformation and hope, you know? So in a war, you parachute in, but they parachute out and they fly far away. So it is one hole and you blow and whoosh, it goes in all directions. So there is something about when you are under such aggressive energy and you break into splinters, you know, and the splinters whoosh go in all direction and you're fragmented in your soul. It's one of the best flower essences to help you come together. And I didn't understand all of this until much later, but I used it a lot on that trip to Sarajevo also. These are the two essences I kept on squirting on the floor of the bus we had rented to go there. Any man crossing combat zone was potentially seen as an enemy and very prone to getting shot. So we had a tough time finding a bus driver who was willing to drive us. And we all had to lie flat on the ground, hiding under the benches. So it would look like the bus was empty, like an insane bus driver was trying to take an empty bus into Sarajevo. And we were very lucky. We did not get shot at or we didn't get intercepted, but it was pretty crazy. And at that time, I mostly squirted dandelion flower essence because I wanted to help the women not to get into the panicky kind of fear, because I thought that wasn't helpful. That could actually really jeopardize our lives, quite frankly. And because panic tends to grip us in the solar plexus, I thought of that. But what I observed really, it's very hard to describe if you've never been in a combat zone, but that it's like the ethers, the air was thick with souls of killed people who hadn't gone onto other existences yet. And what I noticed is they started to crowd towards wherever I sprinkled the essence, and it was giving them the healing and lightness they needed to float off like the seeds of the dandelion. So that was really my starting point with the spiritual warrior essences, thinking of, wow, yeah, I mean, you can argue it's not really bright red, but you can say that the spear thistle is red enough to say, okay, it's the color of the root chakra, together with